Hey, Gordon! The Citadel's on full alert. I've never seen it lit up like that. Get out of City 17 as fast as you can, Gordon. Take the old canals, right? They'll get you to Eli's lab. It's a dangerous route, but there's a whole network of refugees, and they'll help you if they can. I'd come with you, but I gotta look after Dr. Kleiner. Oh, and before I forget, I think you dropped this back in Black Mesa. Good luck out there, buddy. You're gonna need it.
Phonium extraction. Another critical tool we built into FacePoser was the phonium editor. It processed the voice actors' dialogue lines and extracted phoniums to generate basic lip sync animations for our characters. For the hero characters, our animators use this as a starting point to create high-quality custom animations for each dialogue line, incorporating full facial animation. However, in a dynamic choreo scene, the animators wouldn't know exactly what the rest of the actor's body would be doing. This meant it required careful layering of choreo commands and timings in FacePoser, while still maintaining the actor's ability to dynamically respond to the player.
At the time of Half-Life 2's release, most first-person shooters gave the player a gun or a melee weapon right off the bat, but we opted to start them empty-handed. Without a weapon, it was easier to train the player on the more novel ways they're able to interact with the world, and introduce them to our story. We wanted the player to transition from fugitive to the aggressor, and arming them at the right time created that moment naturally. By the time they finally get a weapon, they're done running away. They say sometimes the best way to win is to walk away, but we all know that's not true. The best way to win is to run towards something while shooting at it.
Dynamic mixing. During gameplay, many sounds are playing at the same time, but some are naturally more important than others, and we need to set the volumes of the sounds relative to each other to ensure that the important ones stand out. In a movie, this sound mixing is done as a post-process, but in a game, it happens real-time, responding to the player's actions, so we can't predict ahead of time which sounds will play simultaneously. To handle this, all the sounds are grouped into types and tagged with priorities. Then during gameplay, the audio system monitors all the active sounds and lowers the volume of sounds in a group if a higher priority sound is playing. And this mixing is adjustable. If the gunshots need to be loud in one scene, we can make them higher priority there. If a specific line of dialogue needs to be heard clearly, it can then force all the other sounds to drop in volume. And we do the same thing with music. It's a subtle but very critical system, and it just prevents the soundscape from becoming too cluttered. Bullet audio. If there's one thing we're sure of, it's that a lot of bullets will fly past a player throughout the game. So we spent a bunch of time trying to perfect the audio treatment for it. Unfortunately, bullets in the game are essentially instantaneous, so we can't just attach a sound to them and rely on the movement for positioning. So after some experimentation, we landed on this solution. By figuring out the closest point on the bullet's trajectory to the player's ear, we calculate the exact time and position the bullet would conceptually pass them. We then play two different sounds at that point to fake a Doppler effect, one for the bullet's approach and one for its departure. And we delay the departure sound based on the calculated time the bullet passed by.
audio caching. Another problem we ran into was the sheer amount of audio in the game. With all the gameplay sounds, music, and dialogue, we had too much audio to be able to store it all in memory. Memory was at a premium in 2003. But as you can imagine, we need to be able to play sounds immediately, especially if they're gameplay related. So we built an audio cache, which stored only the first 125 milliseconds of every audio file and kept that in memory. That 125 millisecond time was our best guess for how long it would take us to be able to stream an audio file in from disk. Then, whenever a sound was played in-game, we'd play the start of it from our audio cache while simultaneously kicking off a load of the full audio file from disk. By the time our cache start ended, we'd have the file loaded and could continue playing the rest of the sound. There were some other minor features, like keeping recent sounds fully in memory so that high-traffic ones didn't need to be loaded constantly. In today's engines, all kinds of assets, beyond just sounds, typically use the same kind of strategy.
Physics sound. Getting physics to feel right for the player meant that the sounds produced by physics had to sound right too. As humans, we're all used to how objects and materials sound during various interactions, even if it's not something we actively notice. While we knew we couldn't account for everything, we wanted to focus on the details that contributed most to making our physics sound realistic. We started with per-object sounds for collisions and impacts. This allowed an object like a wooden crate to have custom sounds when it collided with other objects or classes of objects. Next, we began dynamically modifying these sounds based on the characteristics of the physical event, such as the masses involved and the force of the collision. This worked great for collisions, but didn't hold up in other interactions like objects scraping against each other. In reality, a wooden crate makes a different sound when it scrapes against a wall versus when it's thrown against that same wall. Let me tell you, nobody has done more research on the nuances of a wooden crate's physical properties than us. To get what we wanted out of these interactions, we implemented per-material collision sounds, metal against wood, metal against metal, and so on. These sounds were also dynamically modified based on details like material hardness or type of metal. Getting this system to sound right required countless small tweaks, which we could only identify once it was running. We also experimented with custom sounds for rolling objects, but ultimately cut the feature because we weren't happy with the results. Physics sound. Getting
Automating DSP. All the sounds the player hears are processed through our digital signal processing system, or DSP. And this just refers to how audio is altered to reflect the environment the player is in. For example, the same sound will differ when heard in a parking garage, a small room, outdoors. In Half-Life 1, we manually placed invisible nodes throughout the world to define these DSP settings for each space. For Half-Life 2, we knew that manual placement was just going to be way too time-consuming, especially since we wanted a larger game, and we still only had one audio person on the team. So we built a system that automatically determines the DSP settings around the player in real time. It does this by analyzing the space around the player, assessing the volume they're within. It examines the materials that make up the environment, basically. And then the system matches that space to one of the 25 hand-authored basic DSP types. We adjust some parameters, and we create the fully detailed DSP that modifies the sounds the player hears.
Help me! Stop! We didn't do anything!
Metro Cop Scene. This is another scene designed to make it clear that the Metro Cops are the bad guys, except this time the player has a weapon and can finally do something about it. That something comes out of the barrel of a gun. We knew we needed the player to feel righteous, and this moment was part of creating that. The Metro Cops are still human, unlike the rest of the Combine in the game, so we felt like we had to go the extra mile in making sure the player's actions felt like justice and not just wrath.
I'll be looking for you now. You better run. There's nothing else you can do here. Get going!
Union 9 unit down at Workpost Intake Hub, 5.
Staircase. There are situations throughout the game that stem from simple and quite straightforward design goals, and this staircase features 2 of them. The first was to frame the Citadel as it awakened, showing the player they stirred up the hive. The second was to showcase our ragdoll system. While it's standard now, in 2004 it was still a novelty to see bodies tumble realistically, and stairs provided a perfect stage to make that happen.
Program and in community. Respawn. Isolate. Attention, protection. Static invasion. Program and in community. Respawn. Isolate. Inquire. Attention. Unidentified person of interest. Confirm.
City 17 awakens. The early train station section was designed to make the city feel indifferent toward the player, as if Gordon is just another nameless, faceless citizen, ripe for subjugation. But during the tenement raid and rooftop chase, the city identifies the player as an anomaly and starts to stir. Now, with the player as the aggressor, the city fully turns its attention on them. The OverWatch PA system, first heard during the raid, played a key role in delivering this message. If players listen closely, there's a lot of information about the city's awareness. Even when players didn't pay attention, though, the audio treatment still conveyed the emotional message we were aiming for.
Explosive barrels. Here, we introduce explosive barrels, a staple of first-person shooters, but with a new twist. The second pistol shot sets the barrel on fire, starting a timed detonation. A third shot will detonate the barrel immediately. This way, players could either delay the explosion or trigger it right away, depending on the situation. Players may want to feed an explosive barrel to a barnacle and then shoot it twice as a handy way to safely dispatch a cluster of them. The delayed explosion also made for more interesting chain reactions between multiple barrels. Exploding barrels were a fan favorite in the series, but also were internally favored by level designers who often felt like the game could never have enough of them.
Attention, protection needs. Static invasion in progress and in community. Respawn. Isolate. Inquire. Unidentified person of interest. Local. Attention, static invasion in progress and in community. Respawn. Isolate. Inquire. Status invasion in progress in this community. Response, isolate, inquire. Unidentified person of interest. Confirm sources of establishment with local protection immediately.
Lambda Caches. Technically, the first Lambda Cache is at Kleiner's lab, but this is the first one the player finds on their own. We added Lambda Caches to encourage exploration and to hint players where hidden resources could be found, with a fiction being that they were being placed by the Resistance as part of their underground rebellion. In Half-Life, the contents of supply crates were predetermined by the level design. In Shell 2, we introduced adaptive item crates that give the player whatever they are low on at the time, based on resource targets set by the level designer.
Scanners. Scanners presented a tricky game design challenge. While we liked how their dystopian presence helped convey the Combine occupation as an oppressive surveillance state, we didn't actually want them to shoot at the player. We found that aiming into the sky to hit a small mobile enemy with a constant height advantage was something we couldn't make fun. Since we loved their role in the story, we decided that in combat, scanners would serve primarily as eyes, alerting nearby enemies to the player's presence, a feature we reinforced with sound effects from the soldiers. Beyond that, they'd only be able to harass the player with bright lights and occasionally dive bomb after taking enough damage.
Attention protection team. Status invasion.
OverWatch. During development, we generated the OverWatch voice using a free text-to-speech tool, but as we neared shipping, we realized we didn't actually have the rights to use it, so we held auditions with voice actors to find someone who could match the qualities we liked in the generated lines. It didn't take long before we found Ellen McLean, whose delivery was exactly what we were looking for. In her sessions, we played the generated lines for her to mimic, though in her own style. She was a bit sarcastic at first, given that she was being asked to replicate such a robotic delivery, but years later when she returned for her iconic role as GLaDOS in Portal, she'd found a way to creatively integrate that tone into her performance. Pistol design. The standard pistol is the workhorse of the game, functioning not only as the first range weapon you learn to use, but also as a method to interact with physics and destructible objects at a safe distance for the entirety of the game. To help make it feel more responsive and fun to use, the pistol employs a refire mechanic that's unique to it in the game. The gun will fire as fast as the player can click their input button, meaning that they feel an instant response to their input, and the faster they can click, the faster they can shoot.
Attention protection team. Status invasion in progress in this community. Response, isolate, inquire. Unidentified person. Local protection. During community Local protection Attention. Unidentified person of interest. Fire or civil protection immediately.
Shatter Glass. When designing early levels where there are fewer mechanics in the player's toolkit, we found that it's just as engaging to spotlight new technical features instead, as we did here with Breakable Glass. For the shattering effect, glass was divided into a grid of small squares, allowing us to track which were intact or broken, and to blow out larger sections once enough squares were no longer connected. Each square was rendered with a unique texture based on the status of its neighboring squares, creating the sharp, jagged edges between broken and intact glass. While breaking glass is now commonplace in games, it was something we hadn't seen much back when we were making Half-Life 2, and we're incredibly happy with the level of fidelity and dynamicism it brought to the game.
Helicopter Peekaboo. The Combine attack helicopter as central antagonist was something we wanted to develop throughout the entire chapter. The relentless chopper became a character in its own right. Here, if you listen and look overhead, you can hear its engine and see it flying along the train tracks and into the distance. This first glimpse is a small piece of foreshadowing, with its presence becoming more pronounced over time, until eventually you're squaring off against it.
Iterative passes. Some chapters of the game, such as the on-foot sections of the canals in Ravenholm, were developed in multiple passes by different cabals. We found that handing off maps in this way led to greater variety in the experience, and a higher density of interesting moments, as each cabal added their unique touches to the maps. In the on-foot portion of the canals, the first pass established the art direction and the player path, along with the broad strokes of the experience and some major beats. But the team-wide alpha playtest identified insufficient tension and a somewhat monotonous experience here. In our second pass, we returned to the map solely focused on creating that tension and greatly increased the density of moment-to-moment scenarios.
Water shader. The most complex shader we made for the game was the water shader, which made full use of the newly available programmable graphics cards. When water was present, the scene was rendered 3 times. First, the underwater world for refraction, second, a reflected view, and third, the parts above the water. When rendering the water surface, we blended the refractive and reflective views, showing more reflection at glancing angles using the Fresnel equation. We also tracked the ground depth below the water's surface, making it more transparent and less refractive in shallow areas. Additionally, we had to create 2 alternate water rendering techniques for lower-end graphics cards. Mid-range cards displayed a lower detail reflection without refraction or transparency, while low-end cards only rendered a partially transparent surface.
Interstitial Scenes. As playtesting progressed, we often found areas where players lost track of their goal, which isn't uncommon in a game like Half-Life. To address this, we added smaller interstitial scenes to help guide players along their path and reinforce their objective. After finishing the bulk of development on our larger choreo scenes, like Kleiner's Lab, putting these smaller scenes together became relatively straightforward. We discovered that using characters in these moments worked much better than relying on passive storytelling, or even some sort of reminder you'd find baked into a pause menu.
Good God! Guess those sirens are for you, huh? Good thing you found us. You're not the first to come through here by...
This is the Freeman. The Combine's reckoning has come.
Look, we're just a lookout for the Underground Railroad. Main station's right around the corner. They'll get you started on the right foot. Meanwhile, let my Vortigaunt friend here give you a jolt to get you going. Be careful now. We really can't afford to get noticed. Civil protection catches you down here, it's bad news for the whole railroad.
We serve the same history.
Boxcar Bill. This small scene originally featured 2 human characters, but later in development, we replaced one with a Vortigaunt. We wanted to show that Vortigaunts were coexisting with humans and resisting the Combine as well. We also introduced their ability to heal the player, although we didn't fully capitalize on that feature throughout the game. Vortigaunts became a useful narrative tool for keeping dialogue brief, as their hive mind justified their full knowledge of the world and the player's goals. This meant they never had to ask questions, neatly sidestepping the challenge of writing dialogue for a silent protagonist.
Attention protection team. Status invasion in progress in this community. Respawn. Isolate. Inquire. Reminder. Inaction is conspiracy. Report counter behavior to a civil...
Particles. For the source engine, we invested in expanding particle and special effects technology. This allowed for more realistic and complex particle movement, as well as more intricate shapes and shader effects. In particular, adding bump mapping to our particles features made a huge difference in the volumetric look of them. While later iterations of the source engine include a powerful particle system editor, the original version used in Half-Life 2 relied on handcrafted effects, each requiring a programmer to meticulously build the effect manually, which was a pretty labor-intensive process.
In this community. Respawn. Isolate. Inquire. Unidentified person of interest. Confirm your civil status with local protection. Attention.
Barnacle Introduction. Because barnacles can be confusing when first encountered, we wanted to introduce them in a way that showed players their behavior at a safe distance. We decided to do that through a nature show-style predator-prey scene. But, as always, scenes like this took a lot of iteration to get players to reliably see.
Ground protection units. Local unrest structure detected. Assemble, administer, pacify. Attention, community. Unrest procedure code is now in effect. Inoculate, shield, pacify, code, pressure, sword, sterilize.
Surface properties. We play custom footstep sounds when the player walks on the slippery mud. This was a system called Surface Properties that used the material type to determine the sounds and other effects that should occur when walked on or shot at. Earlier in development, we had an effect that slowed players' movement when walking on mud surfaces. However, this was removed in the shipping version as it was decided it was too punishing.
Inoculate, shield, pacify, code, pressure, sword, sterilize.
Hey, over here! Help!
Mounted gun gallery. There are a few things going on in the scene. The turret firing at the breakable crates behind teaches players not to take the threat head-on and instead utilize the sewer route to defeat it. And when they reach the turret, players enjoy using it in a shooting gallery with a wave of Combine soldiers and dive-bombing scanners. We also begin to introduce the missile-firing Combine APC that pushes the players along and will show up again later in the chapter.
Attention, community. Unrest procedure code is now in effect. Inoculate, shield, pacify. Code, unit damage, pressure, intake hub, sword, sterilize.
Station 12, come in. Station 12, do you read?
This is Station 8. We heard 12 go down and out. Surgical strike units are targeting railway stations. Repeat, civil protection is coming down on underground stations. We're already getting refugees from 9 and outlying. Looks like we're...
Station 8, do you copy? Station 8, are you there? We have confirmed reports of manhacks. Repeat, they're filling the underground with manhacks.